Hello folks. Okay, this time I want to talk about code standards. So, well, actually code and document standards, but we usually kind of focus on the code side of things. And we'll talk about document standards as well in a bit. I want to talk about some of the issues in terms of developing them, using them, applying them, enforcing them. Just give a bit of a background to it. And then we'll spend a few minutes going through one of the sort of standard collections of standards. So we'll see how we go here. All right. So again, I mentioned that typically we'll talk about this in terms of code standards. Lots of teams, lots of organizations actually use whole collections of standards for almost everything you can imagine, right? Document standards, version control standards, bug reporting standards, process standards, process development standards, the processes that you go through to figure out your processes and document them and check them. So standards can apply to almost anything. And again, the idea is that we want some means of making sure we do things in a consistent fashion so that everybody understands what to expect, everybody understands how things are going to be done, everybody knows where to look for things, and hopefully you can get less confusion and better efficiency as a team by following this kind of an approach, right? You have a way that things, quote unquote, should be done. Now, that's not without a cost, right? Anytime you start giving people rules on how they have to do things, you are necessarily reducing their flexibility and the potential for creativity by saying, no, it's got to be this way. So there are trade-offs to this for sure. And you're trying to strike the right balance for your team and for your project and for your client, for your organization. What's the best balance to use? Where's that sweet spot in terms of how much do we put into our standards? All right, so going through and creating them is a fairly challenging part of the whole process. If I want to create a set of standards, let's use code standards as an example. If I want to go through and set some standards for my team to use, then I have to decide how extensive they're going to be, how detailed they're going to be, and what standards I'm actually going to pick and why. And of course, the stricter my standards are, the more detailed they are, the more likely it is I'm going to start bumping heads with people who disagree with them, people who don't like that way of doing things. Well, no, it's better if we do it this way, right? Everybody's got their preferences for code layout or for document layout, and everybody has their own reasons for why they prefer something to be this way, not that way. Sometimes it's simply that that's the way I've always done it, but sometimes there's actually a genuine reason for doing things one way or another. So as you start creating standards, you are going to start disagreeing with people over what they should be. And again, you're looking for that ideal trade-off between the improvement that you get in comprehension and reliability and efficiency versus the friction that you're creating within your organization and the overhead in trying to create these more detailed standards and trying to enforce them, trying to see if everybody is actually following them, see if everybody's actually learning them, right? If you produce an 80-page booklet of standards, then for people to adhere to them, they actually have to read that and learn it. So there is this definite, I guess, learning curve to creating good standards, creating standards that are going to be good for your team, for your project. So I mentioned the idea of enforcement. How do we get people to actually stick to the standards? And again, different teams, different groups are going to have different ways of doing it. It might be just self-policing. You know, we expect you to do this. It's up to you. You know, nobody's going to complain unless we actually notice somewhere down the road that you're not adhering to them. It might be peer review, where you basically just say, okay, once you finish writing something, you talk to the person on the other side of the desk or in the next office over and say, hey, could you take a look at this? I just finished it. You want to give it a read over and make sure that it looks like it's adhering to standards. Right? So it might be something relatively informal where you're just making sure that someone, a different pair of eyes, has gone through it. Or you might have a much more formal process where you actually get a group of people to go through and formally inspect it looking for problems. We'll get into talking about formal inspections, and we'll try it out ourselves a little later in the term. Now again, the more detailed your standards are, the more important it becomes to actually have them well documented so that everybody can read the standards, find the standards that they're looking for. You know, if I want to find out what's our standard for the way brackets are supposed to be aligned, I want to be able to find that quickly and not have to weed my way through the entire document. So you need good indices, maybe good search tools, good cross-referencing, so people can find the information they're looking for quickly. You need good examples, right, so that it's clear what you're talking about. If you just write your standards as plain text without good examples of the circumstances where they'll be used, then people aren't likely to understand them, or they're less likely to understand them. And again, the examples make it visual, make it easy for somebody to see. It's probably, I don't think I mentioned it here, but it's probably a really good idea to include the motivation, why this standard is here. Right? This isn't just because I've decided this is the way I want it, this is the way it shall be. You're going through and saying, look, there's a reason for this, here it is. This is likely to cause less errors because. This will be easier to detect in a debugger because. Whatever the reason is, if you've got one, make sure you include it. It doesn't have to be the great long essay, but so that people have got an idea that this isn't just arbitrary. So, you also need a good way for people to learn the standards. Right? If you've just come up with them, or if there's somebody new to the team or new to the project, you need a way to help them gradually assimilate these standards, right? Rather than, again, just throw an 80-page document at them and say, yeah, do this. Right? So you need to think about how you're going to handle these things. All right, so I wanted to take a few minutes and just go through a couple of bits and pieces from one common style guide. So this one's Google's C++ guide. This is really wide-ranging, really detailed. It's difficult to pick up all of it, but you're often going to go through and kind of pick and choose. We're going to use this, this, and this out of some existing style guide. Right? So it is often a matter of all of you going out and picking a guide that's more or less what you like, and then trimming it down or tweaking it to be exactly what you want. So, in terms of this one, again, if you take a look at this, they start off with a reasonably detailed table of contents, and of course, it's a searchable page, so you can also go through and hopefully find anything you want by the way of keywords. So, it's got a decent breakdown of all the different areas that are covered by the standards document. And as we go through and start, I'm just going to browse through a few of these at the beginning, right? It gives a bit of information overall. It gives you the goals of this document, the style guide. And again, it's going through and making sure that people have the motivation for following this, right? What should you be thinking of? What kind of style rules should be here? What are you trying to do by putting these standards in place, right? Trying to optimize this for whoever's reading your code, not for you, the writer. You're trying to be consistent with the base that you've got so far. You're trying to be consistent with the broader community. You're trying to avoid throwing things in that are going to be surprising or dangerous. You're trying to avoid things that an average programmer is going to find difficult to maintain or difficult to understand. Right? So you're going through looking at the motivations behind the document, behind the standards themselves, and the kind of thing you should be thinking of when you're looking at the standards. Talks about what version we're discussing so far, because that can make a significant difference depending on the language that you're talking about. And then it starts diving in for different areas. Talks about headers, talks about self-contained headers, talks about the hash define guards, talks about forward declarations and when you should use them and when you shouldn't, and talks about the pros and cons of different aspects of the style. So again, you're going through and saying, this isn't just arbitrary, we've thought about this, this is the trade-off that you're making by the standards that we're using. Talking about inline functions, talking about the order in which you include things, right? All sorts of different aspects of something can be built into your standards. And if you've got series of 20 hash includes or 50 hash includes, it might really help to have an organized way of laying those out, saying first we're going to include these things, then we're going to include these things, then we're going to include these things. And again, just to make sure that people are consistent and they know where to look in things and they know where to put it themselves. So again, the standards can go through and cover a lot of different aspects of the language. And it's much more than just how you name your variables and how you lay out the code. So I will let you browse these things at your leisure. I really would recommend, when you're I guess when you're really bored, going through and having a read of some of the different aspects and just gradually, over the course of the term, maybe just plug away at 1 or 2 sections a week to see what kind of things are in there and what some of the standards ideas are. And again, even if there aren't standards that you're strictly trying to follow, if you read these things and see why some of these recommendations are in there, it might be something that you decide to include just as one of your own coding habits. Okay, I can see that. That makes sense. I'm going to do it that way, from now on. And I'm just going to skip way to the bottom here for a moment. Just in terms of parting words, and I just like these. Use common sense and be consistent. Right? This is what we're looking for. You don't want to surprise people, right? You don't want to get militant about your coding standards and have it way too detailed and way too picky and start driving people insane. But you don't want to surprise people, right? You've got goals you want to accomplish, and you're always looking at the trade-off. And again, the idea of being consistent, right? If you're going to do things, do them in a similar way so that you're not doing something one way for a long time and then do it a completely different way at some point and totally surprise whoever's reading your code. So that's where I will leave the standards for now. We will come back and revisit this when we get into code inspections later in the term.